When Alina woke up that morning, she felt a small knot of worry in her chest. The sun shone through her bedroom window, but her mother's bed stood empty. Mother had not been well for many days, and now she lay in a hospital bed, resting under bright lights and whispered prayers. Alina had dressed in her favorite yellow dress, the one with tiny white daisies all along the hem, because she believed her mother would like to see her shining in the sunshine color. She clutched a small envelope in her hand, the one her mother had pressed into her palm the night before. Inside was a simple note. In her mother's careful handwriting, "Please find Mr. Blackwood. He can be a father to you today." Elena's house was quiet apart from the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock on the kitchen wall. That clock had counted every slow hour of her mother's sickness. Today her mother had called Alina early, told her to hurry to the hospital after breakfast, and handed her the envelope. "You will know what to do," her mother had whispered, eyes wet but hopeful. Gentle tears had rolled down Elena's cheeks as she kissed her mother's cool forehead. Now the small girl walked to the front door, where her grandmother waited in the car, ready to drive her to Blackwood Industries. Elena was not sure why she had to go there, or even what it looked like inside. All she knew was her mother's wish and the note. When they arrived at the tall building, Alina gazed up at its shiny glass walls. The lobby inside was vast. Sunlight poured through the ceiling windows, lighting up floors of polished marble. Gleaming metal pillars held up the high ceiling, and a row of plush chairs lined the far wall. A sleek reception desk sat near the entrance, where a woman in a navy suit watched the doors. Alina felt small among all the grown people in business clothes, clutching her envelope like a treasure map. As her grandmother guided her forward, Elena's little legs carried her past the potted plants and the dozens of busy employees. Some glanced at her and smiled. Others hurried on, arms full of folders. Alina tried to imagine her mother smiling. If she could see her now, she took a deep breath and stepped closer to the receptionist. "Hello," the receptionist said, soft and kind. "Can I help you?" Alina opened her mouth, but words stuck in her throat. She held out the envelope instead. The woman read it quickly and nodded. "Mr. Blackwood is expecting you," she said quietly. Then she picked up a phone and dialed. Alina stood silent, heart pounding. The receptionist tapped on a tablet and typed a few things. "Please have a seat," she said gently. Alina sat in one of the chairs. She crossed her legs and looked around, hands folded in her lap. Her grandmother stood behind her, and Alina felt a small comfort from that familiar face. But her grandmother did not sit. She only watched. Every few seconds, the receptionist's phone would buzz again, and Alina would sit straighter. After a minute that felt like 1,000, a tall man in a dark suit appeared. He moved with calm confidence, shoulders straight, shoes clicking on the marble. Even from far away, Alina saw that he looked serious. His hair was neatly combed, and he wore a red tie that stood out against the black suit. The man reached the waiting area, and his eyes fell on Alina. He stopped and looked surprised, as if he had not expected anyone so small. "Hello," he said, softening his voice when he saw her. He knelt down so his face was near hers. "Must be Alina." Alina felt her heart leap at the sound of her name. She nodded. She took a deep breath and slowly lifted the note from her pocket. "My mommy said, could you pretend to be my daddy? Just for one day?" Her voice was tiny, shaky with longing. The man's eyes widened, and when he looked at the note and then at Elena's earnest face, his mouth opened as if he wanted to say no, but found a lump in his throat. He swallowed hard and wiped his hand across his brow. Alina noticed the fine line of worry on his forehead. She remembered her mother's tired eyes. Tears pricked at the corners of her own eyes, but she held them back. She wanted him to say yes. He took a breath and reached out for her hand. It was warm, and Alina felt a small spark in her fingers. "All right," he said gently. "I will be your father for today." Elena's face lit up, brighter than the sunlit lobby. She threw her arms around his neck, and he wrapped his strong arms around her. She buried her face in his suit jacket. Breathing in his soft cologne, it smelled like polished wood and fresh linen. She felt safe. The man stood up, holding Alina by the hand. His grip was firm but gentle, and she smiled up at him. He straightened his suit and cleared his throat. "Let's go," he said, "but first, we need to let your grandmother know." Alina turned and waved at her grandmother, who nodded with a tender smile. The receptionist looked relieved and handed the man a visitor badge for Alina and one for himself labeled Mr. Blackwood. He clipped them to their jackets. Then he led her down a hallway of glass walls and quiet offices. Elena's small hand fit easily in his. Her eyes were wide with wonder. She saw rows of desks, sleek computers, and people working in focused silence. The offices smelled of fresh coffee, paper, and polished floors. Occasionally, someone waved to Alina, and she waved back. She felt like a princess touring a grand castle. They stopped in front of a tall elevator. Jonathan, because his badge said Jonathan Blackwood, CEO, pressed the button. He lifted Alina onto his other arm, and she giggled as the doors slid closed. Inside, the elevator hummed and lights above counted down. When it reached the top floor, the doors opened to a bright office with tall windows overlooking the city skyline. Jonathan placed Alina on her feet. She twirled and looked out at the view. She had never seen the city from so high. Tiny cars moved on the streets, and people looked like ants down below. The sun sparkled on the river in the distance. Jonathan closed the office door and led Alina to a plush rug in front of his desk. He patted the rug, and Alina sat cross-legged. He gently took her hands in his and spoke in a calm voice. Alina, I'm Jonathan Blackwood. For today, I'll be your father. We will do some fun things. First, would you like a snack? Alina's eyes shone. She nodded vigorously. Jonathan opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a tin of cookies. He handed one to Alina. She bit into it, crumbs falling onto her yellow dress. Thank you, Daddy, she said, cheeks full. Jonathan laughed softly and wiped the crumbs away. He felt his stern heart soften. He spent the rest of the morning guiding Alina through his office world. He let her press the big red emergency button under very careful watch to see what would happen. A gentle alarm sounded for a few seconds, and a small light blinked on his main console. Jonathan explained that it was only a test, and then reset everything. Alina's eyes widened at the flashing lights. Jonathan smiled, glad to share something from his life with her. Next, they moved to a bright play corner. The office manager to set out some toys and puzzles for Alina. There were building blocks, stuffed animals, and picture books. Alina chose a picture book about animals, and Jonathan sat beside her on the floor. He read aloud in a deep, gentle voice, making the animal sounds. When he said moo, his voice wobbled, and Alina giggled. She snuggled in closer, resting, her head on his shoulder. Jonathan felt her small weight, and his own grown-up worries faded for a moment. Later, as lunchtime approached, Jonathan packed a small lunch for them both. He made peanut butter sandwiches for Ellen, her favorite, a turkey sandwich for himself. They sat in the conference room, where Jonathan cleared away the phones and chairs to make space. Alina sat on his lap as they ate. She told him about her cat, Muffin, and how she missed her mother's gentle smile. Jonathan listened with soft eyes. He felt a protective warmth growing inside him. After lunch, Jonathan checked the time and said, "How about we prepare a surprise for your mother? Would you like to make a card?" Elena's face lit up. She nodded and jumped down. Jonathan found markers and paper in his desk drawer. Alina drew a big heart with her mother's name. Written carefully inside, she added smiley faces, a sun, and flowers. Jonathan helped her sign her name in block letters so her mother could read it easily. When they finished, he placed the card in an envelope and wrote on the outside, "From your little sunshine." Throughout all of this, Jonathan often paused. To look at Elena's bright eyes and brave smile, he wondered about her mother's illness and what it must feel like to be only 7 and facing such worry. He thought about his own childhood and how he had lost his father when he was young. He remembered wishing for someone steady to guide him. Now, he found himself wanting to help Alina and her mother, and he resolved to do whatever he could. Soon, Jonathan glanced at the clock again and realized the day was half gone. He understood that the hour was drawing close for him to return Alina to the hospital. He gently lifted her and said, "Shall we go see your mother now?" Alina nodded. Hopping into his arms, he held her against his chest as they walked back to the elevator. In the lobby, the receptionist watched them return. She smiled as Alina said, Thank you for letting us pretend like this. The receptionist gave Jonathan a kind look and whispered, "Take care of her." Jonathan took Elena's hand again and led her outside. The sun was still warm, and he felt grateful for the gift of this day. Elena looked up at him and said softly, "Thank you, Daddy." Jonathan knelt and kissed her forehead. Asterisk. Jonathan woke early the next morning with a soft sense of purpose. He arrived at the office before sunrise, the city still quiet. He carried a small surprise in his briefcase, a colorful box of Elena's favorite cookies, the ones she had chosen. Herself, the day before, thought of her bright smile and the way she had clung to his hand. The memory made him both careful and excited for the day ahead. When the lobby doors opened, he walked straight to the receptionist. She greeted him kindly and handed him a child-sized visitor badge. He pinned it gently to his suit jacket. Then he made his way to the elevator, stepping inside and pressing the button for the top floor. The elevator hummed and the numbers glowed, in sequence until it reached his office level. Elena was already waiting by the glass doors, her yellow dress shining in the soft morning light. She spotted him and ran forward, arms wide. "Good morning, Daddy," she said, her voice soft but clear. She hopped onto one foot, eager for the next adventure. Jonathan smiled and knelt to meet her at eye level. "Good morning, my sunshine," he replied. "Are you ready for today's fun?" Elena nodded so hard that her ponytail bobbed, led her inside, and closed the door. The office was peaceful, with just the hum of computers and the distant tapping of keyboards. Jonathan guided her to a small couch by the window. First, he said, "Let's watch a cartoon together." He dimmed the lights and touched a remote that brought up a small television screen tucked into the wall. Bright colors danced across the screen as Elena settled onto his lap. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders and watched as she laughed. At the silly characters, when a blue cat chased a yellow duck, Elena threw her head back and giggled. Jonathan felt a warmth spread in his chest. He had never felt so comfortable watching cartoons in his own office. After the cartoon ended, Elena hopped off the couch. She stretched her arms and yawned. "What next, Daddy?" she asked, eyes shining. Jonathan took her hand and led her to a tall cabinet behind his desk. He opened it to reveal an array of snacks, juice boxes, crackers, and the special cookies he had brought. Elena reached for the cookies with excitement. Jonathan poured her a small glass of orange juice. She bit into a cookie and whispered, "Yummy." Jonathan smiled as he watched crumbs fall on her dress. He cleaned the crumbs gently with a soft cloth. "Now," he said with a twinkle in his eye, "would you like to see something very important?" Elena's eyes grew wide. "Important?" she asked. Jonathan guided her across the room to a panel on the wall with a bright red button covered by a glass flap. He opened the flap and pointed. "This is the emergency button," he explained softly. "It calls for help if something goes wrong." Elena looked at it seriously, as if it were a treasure chest in a fairy tale. Closed his eyes for a moment. He had to trust her just a little. "Would you like to press it?" he asked. Elena hesitated, then nodded. Jonathan held her hand and guided her small finger to the button. She pressed down gently, and a soft alarm echoed through the room. A green light blinked on the console. Elena giggled at the sound and the flashing light. Jonathan quickly reset the alarm and told her it was just a test. He lifted her into his arms and spun her around once. She laughed as her dress flared out. Next, Jonathan led her to the play area he had arranged with the help of his assistant. It was a bright corner of his office, with a soft rug on the floor and shelves filled with toys, were building blocks, stuffed animals, and coloring books. Elena dropped onto the rug and began to build a tall tower of blocks. Jonathan knelt beside her and helped balance the blocks as they grew higher. When the tower wobbled, Elena held her breath and then collapsed into giggles when it tumbled. She covered her face with her hands in delight. Jonathan picked up a soldier toy and pretended it marched into battle. Elena squealed with laughter and joined in, making the toys dance. After the blocks, they sat at a small child-sized table where coloring books and crayons were spread out. Elena chose a page with a big sun and flowers. Jonathan picked a purple crayon and started coloring a flower. Elena looked at his flower and said, "Daddy, purple flowers don't grow?" He smiled and nodded.
In my garden they do. He
Said, making a funny face. Elena giggled and added purple petals to her drawing. Soon the table was covered in bright colors: blue grass, red clouds, and a pink sky. Jonathan admired her imagination and felt a soft pride. He kept her drawings safe in his briefcase for later. As the morning wore on, the office phones began to ring and employees returned from coffee breaks. Jonathan checked his watch and saw it was almost time for the next board meeting. He looked down at Elena, whose eyes were growing sleepy. She yawned and rubbed her eyes. Jonathan scooped her into his arms and carried her down the hallway toward the conference room. Inside the conference room, he pulled out 2 chairs and made space in the corner for Elena's play area. He turned off the phone and dimmed the lights again so she could rest. Elena curled up with a soft blanket he had brought and fell asleep. Within moments, Jonathan cleared his mind and joined the meeting. He spoke with calm authority, but he felt calmer than ever before, knowing Elena slept safe nearby. When the meeting ended, Jonathan checked on her. Elena woke with a stretch and a soft smile. He offered her more cookies and juice. She blinked sleepily and accepted. Then she sat on his lap as he summarized the meeting in simple words. He told her that the grown-ups were working to help the company grow and take care of people. Elena nodded and sipped her juice. After the meeting, Jonathan decided it was a good time for lunch. He packed up a small basket with peanut butter sandwiches, apple slices, and carrots. Elena's grandmother had sent along her favorite orange cookies, too. They carried the basket to a round table in a sunny atrium. Jonathan spread a clean cloth on the table and set out the food. Elena climbed onto his lap and they ate together. She talked about her favorite games at home and the new kitten she hoped to see when she returned. Jonathan listened and asked gentle questions. He learned that Elena loved singing songs and telling jokes. She sang a short song about a dancing rainbow, and Jonathan laughed at her sweet tune. After lunch, Jonathan stood and said, "Let's do something special for your mommy." Elena's eyes brightened. "Okay," she replied. He led her back to his office where he had hidden a stack of colorful cards and stickers. He placed a fresh sheet of paper and markers on the desk. Elena picked her favorite colors and began to draw a big heart. Jonathan helped by writing "Mommy" in careful letters at the top. Elena decorated the heart with smiley faces, butterflies, and suns. When she finished, Jonathan folded the paper into a card. They walked together down a long hallway to the mailroom. Jonathan handed the card to the mail clerk and asked if it could be delivered to the hospital's children's wing. The clerk smiled and promised it would. Elena waved goodbye to the card as if it were a little bird flying off to her mother. As afternoon turned to evening, Jonathan realized the day was almost over. He and Elena walked back to the lobby. The receptionist raised an eyebrow at them, smiling warmly. "Did you have a good day?" she asked. Elena nodded and turned to Jonathan. "Thank you for today, Daddy," she said softly. Jonathan knelt and hugged her. "Thank you for letting me be your daddy today," he whispered. He led her outside to the car where her grandmother waited. Elena waved at Jonathan until the car drove away. He watched until it rounded the corner and then walked back into the lobby. His suit felt a bit loose after a day of laughter and play, and his heart felt full. He looked at the spot where Elena had stood and knew he would never forget her bright eyes and trusting smile. Jonathan returned to his empty office, sat at his desk, closed his eyes, and remembered the way Elena's laughter had echoed through the halls. He opened his briefcase and took out one of Elena's drawings. He pinned it to the bulletin board above his desk. It was a purple flower surrounded by yellow suns. He smiled and whispered to himself, "Thank you, little one." Then he turned back to his work, feeling a new sense of kindness guiding him forward. Jonathan glanced at the clock on his office wall and saw that the sun was already tilting toward the west. The warm golden light slipped through the tall windows, and he knew it was time for the next part of their day together. He crouched beside Elena, who was finishing the last strokes of a colorful drawing. "Elena," he said softly, "would you like to see your mother now?" Elena looked up, her big brown eyes hopeful. She nodded quickly and hopped down from the chair. "Yes, please," she said, voice small but certain. Jonathan tucked the drawing carefully into an envelope. It was a map of bright hearts and smiling suns, drawn especially for her mother. He placed it in his pocket and held out his hand to Alina. She slipped her small fingers around his. Together they walked through the silent halls of Blackwood Industries, their footsteps echoing softly. When they reached the lobby, the receptionist gave a small, understanding nod. She had seen Alina smile and laugh all day, and she could tell the girl needed to see her mother. Outside, the warm breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. The city noise was distant here, replaced by birdsong and the hum of passing cars. Jonathan guided Alina toward a sleek black car parked at the curb. His driver, Mr. Harris, stood ready. He held the door open for Alina, and she climbed in, looking out the window at the tall buildings. Jonathan settled into the back seat beside her. Mr. Harris closed the door quietly and drove off. The ride to the hospital was calm. Alina watched the city go by, pointing out cranes lifting steel beams for new skyscrapers and ice cream trucks parked outside playgrounds. Jonathan answered her questions simply, telling her that the cranes were building new homes and offices, and the trucks were there for children on hot days. Alina nodded, satisfied with his answers, and looked back at the envelope in his lap. She asked, "Will you give this to Mommy?" Jonathan smiled and said, "I will give it to her myself." When they arrived at the hospital, Jonathan helped Alina from the car. She held tightly to his hand. The hospital entrance had automatic sliding doors that opened with a whoosh. Inside, the air smelled like antiseptic and fresh flowers from the reception desk. They passed a row of chairs and a vending machine filled with snacks. Alina's small feet made soft taps on the shiny floor as Jonathan led her toward the elevators. A kind nurse saw them and opened the elevator door. "Mr. Blackwood, right this way," she said. Jonathan nodded, and they stepped inside. The elevator hummed and rose quietly. When the doors opened, they were on the children's wing, where bright paintings of animals decorated the walls. A painted giraffe stretched its neck toward purple balloons, and a friendly bear held out a lollipop. Alina's face lit up at the cheerful pictures. The nurse guided them down a short hallway to a small garden area. It was a peaceful spot with benches, potted plants, and a fountain that trickled soft water. Sunlight filtered through a glass roof, warming the stones around the fountain. Alina hurried toward a bench near the fountain and sat down on the edge. She hugged her knees and watched the water ripple. Jonathan knelt beside her. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and said, "Your mother should be here soon." Alina took a shaky breath. "I'm a little scared," she whispered. Jonathan squeezed her shoulder. "It's okay to be scared," he said. "I'll be right here with you." He gave her a small, reassuring smile. Alina nodded, and they waited in silence, listening to the fountain's soft music. Soon a doctor emerged from a door leading from the hospital rooms. He wore light green scrubs and carried a clipboard. He paused when he saw Alina and Jonathan. "Alina," he said, "kindly, your mother is awake and resting. She would like to see you now." He led them through the door and into a quiet room. A single bed stood near the window, and on it lay Alina's mother. Her hair was pulled back, and a thin blanket covered her legs. Although she looked tired, her eyes brightened when she saw Alina. "Alina, my sweet girl," her mother whispered. Lifting a weak hand, Alina ran to the bed and climbed up carefully, settling next to her mother. She placed the envelope and drawing gently on the bedside table. Her mother took Alina's hand and kissed her forehead. "You look so beautiful," she said softly. "And you have made this day special." Alina reached for Jonathan's hand and pulled him forward. She said, "Mommy, this is my daddy for today." Mother looked at Jonathan with gratitude. In her eyes, "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for being with my daughter." Jonathan knelt beside the bed and took the envelope. He handed the drawing to Alina's mother. She opened it and smiled at the swirling colors and joyful shapes. "It's beautiful," she said, tears filling her eyes. "She made this for me." Jonathan nodded. "She's very brave," he said softly. "Wanted to bring you this." Today, Alina snuggled closer to her mother. "I missed you so much," she said, voice trembling. Her mother hugged her tightly. "I missed you too," she replied. "But I'm feeling better now." Alina's mother reached out her other hand to Jonathan. Mr. Blackwood, she said, voice gentle. Thank you for spending the day with my daughter. Jonathan took her hand respectfully. It was my honor, he said. She brightened my day more than I brightened hers. They sat together quietly for a few moments. Elena's mother closed her eyes for a short rest. Jonathan and Elena sat on a small couch by the bed. Jonathan asked Elena to tell him about her day. She began to describe the cartoons they watched, the cookies they shared, and the big red button she pressed. She talked about the play corner and how high her block tower grew. Jonathan listened, smiling as Elena's cheeks glowed with excitement. He realized how much children's laughter could light up a room. After a while, the doctor peeked in, checked Elena's mother's chart, and smiled. You're doing very well, he said. We think you can go home in a few days. Elena's mother beamed with relief. Thank you, she whispered. The doctor nodded and left quietly. Jonathan stood and said, Let me go and bring some juice and a snack for the two of you. He stepped out and found a small counter with a coffee machine and vending machine. He bought juice boxes and a packet of crackers. Returning to the room, he placed them on the bedside table. He poured juice into 2 small cups and handed one to Elena's mother and one to Elena. They sipped slowly, sitting close together. Elena's mother looked at Jonathan with a soft smile. Would you like to join us for dinner tonight? She asked. Jonathan shook his head gently. I'm afraid I have to go back to the office, he explained. But I will call you tomorrow morning and check on you. Elena's mother nodded. Thank you, she said. You have already done so much for us. Elena leaned back against the pillows and rested her head on her mother's shoulder. Jonathan stood nearby, watching the two with a gentle pride in his heart. He thought of how a small gesture could bring hope to a frightened child and her unwell mother. The bond formed in one day felt real and true. As the light outside began to fade, Jonathan knew they needed to leave. He crouched beside Elena. Sweetheart, he said softly, it's time for me to go. Elena blinked up at him. I don't want you to go, she whispered. Jonathan's throat tightened. He knelt and hugged her. No, he said, quietly, but I will call you first thing tomorrow. I promise. Elena nodded reluctantly. He turned to Elena's mother. I will check in with you tonight, he said. You rest now. She smiled and closed her eyes, drifting into a light sleep along with Elena. Jonathan tiptoed to the door and gently closed it behind him. In the hallway, he took a deep breath and felt the weight of the day settle around him. He still carried the warmth of Elena's laughter and the image of her mother's thankful smile. Jonathan walked back to the elevator and rode it down alone. The garden area now looked quiet and empty. The fountain whispered softly in the dusk. He paused for a moment and remembered how small Elena had looked when she first arrived. Now she was asleep in her mother's arms, safe and loved. We pressed the button for the lobby and rode down. Back in the lobby, the lights were bright, but the day's bustle had calmed. Jonathan approached the receptionist. Thank you, he said simply. She offered him a kind smile. Take care, sir, she said. Jonathan nodded and slipped his coat on. Outside, the cool evening air greeted him. He walked to his car and drove back to the office, thoughts busy with the day's moments, felt empty and full at the same time, as if a piece of his own heart was left with Elena and her mother. When he reached his office late that evening, he sat at his desk and took out Elena's drawing from his pocket. He pinned it next to the first one on his board. 2 suns and 2 hearts shone above his computer screen. He switched off the desk lamp and stood in the dim room, staring at the drawings. He whispered to the empty office, You both are my sunshine. Then he turned off the lights and went home, carrying Elena's story in his heart. The next morning, the sun rose soft and warm, casting golden light across the city skyline. Jonathan arrived at the office early, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers he had chosen just for Elena. Their bright petals nodded in the morning breeze as he walked through the lobby toward the cafe area that overlooked a quiet cobblestone street. He set the flowers gently on the table and smoothed the white tablecloth laid beneath them. Soon, Elena arrived in her grandmother's car, her yellow dress fluttering in her grandmother's gentle breeze. She spotted the flowers, and her eyes shone. "There for me?" she asked, her voice hopeful. Jonathan smiled as he lifted her into his arms. "For you and your mommy?" he said softly. Elena tucked the flowers in her lap and reached for his hand. Together they sat at the small round table by the window. Elena's grandmother sat across from them, her kind eyes watching. She wore a soft shawl over her shoulders and held a thermos of hot tea for Elena's mother, who was still resting after her hospital stay. Jonathan poured tea into a delicate mug and passed it to her grandmother to take back to the hospital. Then he turned back to Elena. "What shall we do today?" he asked. Elena thought for a moment, tracing circles on the tablecloth. "Can we draw more pictures?" she asked shyly. Jonathan nodded. He reached into his briefcase and brought out a stack of colorful paper and a set of crayons. Elena clapped her small hands together, excited. She selected a red crayon and began to draw a bright sun, while Jonathan drew beside her a tall tree with strong branches to shelter little ones. He looked at Elena's drawing and said, "That tree will keep you safe, no matter what." And she nodded solemnly, coloring in each branch with care. After they finished drawing, Elena's forehead creasing in concentration, Jonathan folded their pictures into envelopes for her mother. He wrote on each envelope, "From Elena with love." Elena watched him write and then traced her name slowly with her finger. "I hope Mommy likes them," she whispered. Jonathan squeezed her hand gently. "She will love them," he said. Then they stood and walked out of the cafe, stepping onto the cobblestones. The air smelled faintly of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. Jonathan suggested they stop by to pick up something sweet. Elena's eyes lit up at the thought of pastries. They entered the small bakery, where the baker smiled and offered them a tray of fresh croissants and jam-filled buns. Jonathan let Elena choose two treats. She picked a flaky croissant and a strawberry bun, her cheeks rosy with excitement. Continued toward the hospital in the quiet morning. The streets were calm, and Jonathan held Elena's hand close so she would not slip. She skipped a little, humming a tune about sunshine and rainbows. When they reached the hospital garden again, the fountain sparkled in the sunlight. Elena ran forward to the bench where her mother sat wrapped in a soft blanket. Her mother's eyes brightened at the sight of her daughter. Elena ran to her side and knelt, opening the envelopes one by one and showing her mother the drawings. Her mother's smile grew wider with each picture: a sun shining over a green field, a tall tree protecting a tiny house, two stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. A tear slipped down her cheeks as she hugged Elena close. "They are perfect," she whispered, kissing Elena's hair. Elena beamed. Jonathan stood nearby, watching them. He thought about how fragile life could be, and how brave a little girl's heart could be. He approached quietly, carrying the tray of pastries. He set it on the small table beside the bench and poured juice into 2 cups for them both. "For breakfast," he said gently. Elena's mother thanked him and accepted a cup. She offered the other to Elena, who sipped with delight. The 3 of them sat together, eating pastries and watching the fountain's gentle dance. Elena's mother leaned into her daughter and whispered something that made Elena giggle. Jonathan listened as they shared a small secret, nodding and smiling at each other. After a while, Elena's mother sat up and brushed a crumb from Elena's cheek. "Jonathan," she said softly, "I want to thank you again. You have given us hope and joy when we needed it most." Jonathan knelt beside the bench and took her hand respectfully. "It has been my privilege," he replied. He looked at Elena, whose small hand lay atop hers. "She is an amazing little girl," he said. "She reminds me of the true meaning of family." Elena's mother nodded, tears glistening. "Would you like to come home with us when I leave the hospital tomorrow?" she asked, voice hopeful. Jonathan's heart ached at the invitation. He swallowed and replied, "I cannot tonight, but I will be there when you come home. I promise." Elena's mother sighed in relief, adjusted her blanket, and looked up at the sun filtering through the glass roof. "Thank you," she said. Again, Jonathan rose and turned to leave with Elena. He stood and brushed imaginary dust from his suit. Elena hopped into his arms and looked up at him. "I don't want today to end," she said. Jonathan held her close. "I know," he whispered. "But I will see you tomorrow morning, bright and early." Elena nodded, burying her face in his shoulder. He carried her through the garden and back to the lobby. The receptionist greeted them with a warm smile. "Good morning," she said, as if she already knew. Jonathan smiled back and said, "Thank you for everything," Elena waved shyly. Outside, her grandmother waited with the car. Elena climbed into the back seat and waved at Jonathan until the car pulled away. He watched until he could no longer see her small face. Then he turned and walked back into the building. He felt the weight of the day settle into his chest, a mix of joy and longing. He climbed the elevator to his office, pinching the promise he had made to visit again. When he arrived, he saw the drawings he had pinned to his board the day before. He added today's pictures beside them: a sun, a tree, a rainbow under which two stick figures held hands. He stepped back and admired the bright gallery. His normally quiet office now felt alive with color and warmth. Nowadays, when the office was empty and the sun was low in the sky, Jonathan sat at his desk and thought of Elena's laughter, of her mother's grateful smile, and of the promise he had made. He picked up the phone and dialed the hospital. Nurse answered, and he asked how his two friends were doing. The nurse replied that Elena's mother was resting well and hoped to be discharged soon. Jonathan thanked her and hung up. He closed his eyes for a moment, imagining Elena's bright face. Then he wrote in his planner, "Visit Elena and her mother tomorrow at 8 o'clock. He stared at the note, feeling a sense of purpose he had never known before. That night, as Jonathan left the office, he paused at the door and touched the cool metal handle. Looked back at the drawings on the wall once more. They were simple pictures, drawn by a small hand, but they spoke volumes of hope, of trust, and of a bond formed in a single day. He whispered to the empty room, "I'll be there, my sunshine."
Oh.
Then he stepped out into the evening air, carrying with him the warmth of a little girl's love and the promise of tomorrow's reunion. Jonathan woke before dawn, his mind full of promise and gentle worry. He dressed quickly, choosing a soft blue shirt instead of his usual crisp white, hoping Elena's mother would feel calm when she saw him.
Outside,
The air was cool and still. He took a deep breath and felt the day's brightness settle into his chest. Today was the day Elena and her mother would leave the hospital. He checked his watch: 7 o'clock. He smiled and grabbed the small gift bag he had prepared the night before. Inside were soft slippers for Elena's mother and a new storybook for Elena, filled with simple tales of courage. He hoped the gift would light their way home. By 7:30, Jonathan stood in the hospital lobby. He carried 2 fresh coffee cups, one strong black coffee for himself, and one creamy hot chocolate for Elena. He had also asked the snack cart to bring fresh yogurt and fruit for Elena's mother. The lobby was quiet, lit by the soft glow of overhead lamps. A few early visitors waited on plush chairs. Receptionist saw Jonathan and gave him a warm nod. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," she said softly. "They are ready for you." Jonathan thanked her and followed her down the bright corridor to the children's wing. When the door to the garden opened, Elena ran forward to meet him. She wore her yellow dress again, freshly pressed and bright as sunshine. In her arms, she clutched her storybook tight. Jonathan knelt down and offered her the hot chocolate. She accepted it with a big smile that lit up her face. "Thank you, Daddy," she said, her voice full of sleep and happiness. Jonathan wrapped an arm around her small shoulders and whispered, "You are welcome, my little star." He stood and glanced toward the hospital rooms, spotting Elena's mother in her wheelchair, being guided by a nurse. Elena's mother looked pale, but determined as she wheeled herself toward them. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and her eyes glowed with relief at seeing Jonathan. He set down the coffee cups on a small table nearby and moved to open the door. For them, Elena bounded ahead, offering her mother the yogurt and fruit. Her mother smiled, and Jonathan helped her taste the yogurt. "This is perfect," she whispered. He then handed her the soft slippers. She slipped them on and sighed at their warmth. Jonathan watched her, his heart gentle yet proud. "You look comfortable," he said. She nodded and offered him a small, grateful smile. Soon, they all stepped outside into the morning light. A hospital transport car waited at the curb. Jonathan had arranged it so Elena wouldn't have to sit in the back seat alone. Instead, he would ride with her mother in the front. Elena's mother settled into the passenger seat, handing her the storybook first. She opened it and traced a finger over the pages, her smile growing steadier. Jonathan pressed the new pajamas he had brought into her hands too, so she could change into soft clothes once they got home. "A little comfort for the journey," he said kindly. Inside the car's back seat, Elena buckled herself in and asked Jonathan, "Can you read to me from my book?" He nodded and opened to the first page. As the car drove away, he read slowly, making gentle voices for the characters. Elena's eyes grew wide at the funny parts and soft at the kind parts. Outside the window, the city blinked awake delivery. Trucks rolling by, shop owners sweeping the sidewalks, and a few early joggers on the road. Elena leaned her head on Jonathan's shoulder and listened quietly. Jonathan felt a deep contentment as he read, realizing how much these simple moments meant to both of them. When they arrived at Elena's home, Jonathan stepped out first. He opened the door and caught sight of the small house white siding. With a blue door, a little garden filled with marigolds and daisies. Elena's grandmother stood by the front porch, waiting with a warm blanket and a pot of tea. She waved, and Jonathan waved back, his heart light. He helped Elena's mother out of the car, steadying her arm as she stepped onto the concrete path. Elena ran ahead, unlocking the front door with the key she carried on a string around her neck. They all went inside together. Inside, the house smelled of fresh tea and warm bread. Jonathan helped carry the small bag of groceries he had bought. That morning, fresh vegetables, soup, and Elena's favorite banana muffins. Elena's grandmother smiled at him as she placed the groceries on the kitchen counter. Elena's mother sank into her favorite armchair, stretching out her legs and sighing with relief. Jonathan took off his jacket and hung it on the coat rack. He knelt beside the chair and asked if she needed anything. She whispered, "Just your presence." Jonathan nodded and settled on a stool nearby. They spent the rest of the morning unpacking and talking softly. Elena set her new storybook on the low shelf next to Muffin, the cat's cushion. She picked up Muffin, who purred in comfort. Elena's mother watched her daughter carefully, brushing a strand of hair behind Elena's ear. She looked over at Jonathan and said, "You made this possible." Jonathan shook his head gently. "You were brave. Elena was brave. I only helped." Elena looked at him and said, "You are our hero, Daddy." Jonathan's eyes softened, and he gently ruffled her hair. "You are my sunshine," he replied. After a simple lunch of soup and fresh bread, Jonathan realized it was time to say goodbye. He stood and thanked Elena's grandmother for her warmth and kindness. He embraced Elena's mother gently and promised to call that evening to check. On her, he knelt and hugged Elena tightly. She buried her face in his chest. "I will miss you," she whispered. Jonathan lifted her chin and looked into her eyes. "I will miss you too," he said softly. "But remember, I am just a phone call away." Elena nodded and gave him a small smile. He walked to the front door, feeling the weight of farewell settle in his heart. He paused on the porch and turned back. Elena stood by the window, waving through the glass. Jonathan lifted his hand and waved back until she turned away. He stepped off the porch and walked down the path, breathing deeply in the fresh air. His suit felt different now, softer somehow, as if it had absorbed the warmth of the day. Back in his car, Jonathan drove slowly, passing the hospital where the day began and the office tower where his normal life awaited. He thought of the little house, the marigold garden, and Elena's bright eyes. He realized that the world felt a bit bigger and kinder because of the day he had spent with them. When he reached his office parking lot, he sat for a moment in silence. The city hummed around him, cars, distant voices, the hum of neon lights warming the sidewalks. Before he got out, Jonathan took out his phone and typed a quick message to Elena's mother. "How are you and Elena?" "I am thinking of you." He hit send, watching the message go. He felt a gentle glow in his chest, knowing he had become a small part of their family. Then he turned off the engine and stepped out into the night air. The stars shone above the city lights, bright and constant. Jonathan looked up and whispered, "Thank you for letting me be there, Daddy, even for one day." He walked into the office building and rode the elevator up to his floor. The lights in his office were dim, but he could still see the drawings pinned to his board, the suns, the trees, the stick figures under rainbows. He placed his new storybook next to them as a reminder of the day's magic. Jonathan sat at his desk, closed his eyes, and let the quiet wash over him. He thought of Elena's laughter, her mother's smile, and the simple power of kindness. He knew life would never be the same, that a little girl's wish had changed him forever. Finally, he stood and turned off the desk lamp. The office was empty and still, but his heart felt full. Jonathan walked to the window and looked out over the city where lights twinkled like promises. He whispered to the darkness, "I will always be here for you." Then he took a deep breath and stepped back into the hallway, ready to face the world with a new hope shining inside him.